Yesterday, the boys and I took a walk around our little island. It isn't big, not even a quarter mile wide, and just shy of 2 miles long. From almost any spot, you can see water. I've always had trouble living anywhere landlocked. Maybe it's from growing up surrounded by water. Maybe it's the Norwegian DNA swimming in my veins. Maybe it's some latent fear of being trapped in one place for too long. I don't know, but I need to know the water is there for my heart to feel at ease. Anyone who has lived near water, be it a river, a lake, the ocean, knows that water has many lessons to teach us. Our water, the East River, is technically a tidal estuary. It's only 16 miles connecting Upper New York Bay and the Long Island Sound. And being a tidal estuary, the direction of the river changes often. The depth changes frequently, exposing the rocks of the seawall or creeping high enough that you think you might be able to touch it if you just reached out. There's almost always traffic on the East River, especially now that the ferries go round and round. Enormous barges carrying unknown goods, smaller boats, tugs, police and fire boats, and in summer, jet skis, sailboats, motorboats. If you sit beside the river for just a little while, you are guaranteed some interesting human invention will pass by. But there's more than that for those who want to look. The seagulls swarm around the posts of the river railings, swinging their bodies out over the water in search of food. And the ducks, paddlings of ducks. I learned this week a group of ducks can be called a raft or a team or a paddling. If you sit beside the river, you can watch the paddlings of ducks as they navigate their watery home. And yesterday, as we walked, I saw a paddling of ducks just floating in whatever normal formation they adopt. Nothing looked strange. They just sat there on the water. But when you're a duck, just sitting there doesn't really mean much. Not for the first time, I marveled at the way moving water is never the same. As the ducks floated, along came wake from a ferry headed north. The ducks didn't move. The water rolled beneath them. They rode the waves. And while they ended up in a different place than they had been in when the wake first came, they were no worse for the wear. Ducks are made for water, and water is made to shift. In any moment, the river is different than it was the second before. Now, I realize that ducks, of course, don't conceive of it this way, but as I watched, I thought about how, being at the mercy of the changing waters, they inevitably lost position, lost possibly food, but they didn't lose each other. The paddling stayed together as they rode that waving wake. We have faced changing waters for the last 12 months. We mentioned earlier that 500,000 milestone. Some data aggregators say we haven't quite hit it. Others say we have passed it already. And honestly, it doesn't matter if it happened the other day or if it will happen in the next 2 days. The magnitude of the loss of life we have experienced is staggering. The number of kitchens the world over that now hold such abundant memories is hard to fathom. And for me, at least, as we approach that year-long anniversary, I find myself somewhat unmoored. I am irritable. I am too hard on my children who are also going through traumatic loss after loss. I feel unmotivated and tired, and sleeping is a challenge, even though I'm tired all the time. I feel antsy in my own skin, and if it snows one more time, I share this because I suspect I'm not the only one. A tough and cold winter is challenging under the best of circumstances, but add prolonged and sustained grief on top of it, and you have a recipe for irritability and misery and fatigue. We have all known hard winters, but for most of us, Here in our privileged nation, prolonged grief is not something we have had to endure. The prolonged grief we're in the midst of isn't just about those 500,000 lives lost, though. And I think this is important to say. Along with those great losses through death have come lots of other losses. Birthdays without parties, graduations online, weddings postponed, a million hugs thwarted, last I love yous stolen, friendships put on hold. The list goes on and on. 12 months of life on pause have given every last one of us cause to grieve because we are confronting daily our awareness of time passing. I've been thinking a lot lately about how life is kind of always like this. It's just usually so much more protracted. A missed milestone here or there, or a lost friendship once a decade, but we're compressing into this tight time frame losses through death or otherwise that might normally happen across years. And we're experiencing them side by side, all struggling at the same time, rather than taking turns in our grief, as is so often and blessedly possible in normal times. Although we tend to reserve the words for the ending of a life, our human lives are in truth filled over and over with loss and grief. A million little cuts, if you will. I think I shared with you all the story of sitting with my father at our dining room table one day as we watched the kids play. Without looking at me, he said, "I wish I would be here to see who they are as grown-ups." My father and I are very similar. We are the types that live with a certain kind of melancholia below all else, a deep knowing of the ways that life will be lost to us. Deep knowledge of our finitude brings sorrow. This past Christmas, one of my children articulated how challenging it is to feel his own childhood passing, the loss of certain kinds of magic, growing up and being aware of how time moves and what is gone forever. He is definitely my child, longing to grow up and already nostalgic for what was when he was small. The passing of our childhood, the passing of our lives can bring sorrow. Recently, I've been so aware of my younger children, the way that they can still leap into my arms, the way they still slip their hands into mine. And I have been painfully aware that one day, not too long from now, I won't be able to lift them anymore. We won't know until it has already happened. We won't be able to memorialize that last time they cling to me like a baby koala. The loss of certain ways of relating to each other brings sorrow. As I approach 40, I've also been thinking about the great losses of my own life. Less the deaths of beloveds, though certainly there have been those. More the loss of dreams or hopes or possibilities. I have a wonderful life, but there are emptinesses as there are in any life. Dreams unfulfilled, passions unexplored. The what ifs, the what might have beens, the I wishes that we still cling to bring sorrow. Our lives are not joy interrupted by the singular horror of death. They are a constant dance between the grace and the terror of time. We all know this. We push those feelings to the side. We hold the melancholy and nostalgia at bay, perhaps tearing up at a song or a book, but generally attempting to reserve our grief for the big losses that we publicly acknowledge. I have many thoughts about why we do this, why we discredit the small griefs of a lifetime. I think we've over-valorized strength and undervalued vulnerability, probably in order to create a society of doing and making and creating and progress rather than one of wholeness and living. When we ignore and deny the minor losses, we enable treating each other more harshly, treating our fellow stardust travelers as commodity or product, rather than as whole, spiritual, beloved humans whose hearts we adore. And I think it has become habit, culturally ingrained, less a matter of conscious thought and more a this is how it is. But when we do this, when we don't acknowledge those little and medium losses, when we discredit the very real grief that happens with everyday living rather than just with deaths, well, then we deny our own wholeness and we lose an opportunity. In Unitarian Universalism, we dedicate babies. We don't bless them to remove original sin. We simply bless them for the people they will become. And when I dedicate babies, I touch different parts of their bodies with a flower and speak a prayer for that part of them. Their hands that will work for justice, a mouth that will speak the truth with compassion. And the last thing I do is I touch the flower to their heart and I say, may you know the full range of human emotions, but above all, may you feel abundant love given and received throughout the days of your life. And the words aren't just words. We feel such a range as humans. Sometimes it overwhelms us, but that range, it brings us into deeper knowledge of ourselves and of others. It increases our empathy, our ability to live compassionately and generously in the world. And it also helps us increase the love that moves through the world. Love for ourselves and for others, love for these lives of ours. In the face of loss and pain, sorrow and suffering, truly what we have is love, love given and received. My oldest has asked a few times about death, not what death will feel like, but what mourning will feel like, what grieving will feel like. He's asked how life goes on when the person you love most in the world dies. He's asked me how you move through. The same question is true of every loss. How do we move past that miscarriage, that divorce, that job loss, that dream deferred or denied? How do we move past loneliness we never thought we would feel? How do we move past isolation and deep longing for moments we can never recover? How do we move past the passage of time? How do we keep going in spite of the human reality of loss and longing? How do we live from the belly of the whale? When we're in the belly of the whale, surrounded by pain, it can be hard to remember that there is more beyond the loss. Even harder, perhaps, to remember that there are people who love us beyond that belly. When that rolling, moving water freezes over and it feels like all we know is hardship in the depth of winter, it can be hard to remember that below that fragile ice shelf is moving water, ready to bring change again, and that all around us, our paddling of fellow ducks remains. The answer to my son's questions, I believe, are not substantially different in normal times or in pandemic times. How we move is by love. And please know that I realize there is a difference between normal times and pandemic times. Isolation is that difference, and it is very real. We can't look around as easily and find our ducks. There's no manual, no roadmap, no particular way to hold our sorrow that will fix it all, not before COVID, not during, and not after. But I really do think that cultivating love is the best shot we have to live our lives as fully and joyfully as we can. We love in spite of, we love anyway, we love through, we love beyond. That's what I tell my children. We don't let loss scare us out of loving ourselves enough to dream of our future, loving each other enough to risk and be vulnerable and care for one another, loving the world enough to fight for it, loving life enough to live it every day, every moment. And what does that mean? When we feel beaten down, alone, there are steps we can take. We can offer ourselves love. Love ourselves enough to do our best to treat our bodies gently. Good food, baths, showers, enough sleep, exercise, our favorite TV show. And love our whole selves enough to cut ourselves some slack. Maybe the vacuuming or that phone call can wait one more day. Maybe that extra brownie is exactly what you need. especially now in the isolation of pandemic living. Holding ourselves with loving care is so vital. And then we love others enough to trust them with our vulnerability and our struggle. We send that text or that email or make that call that says, I am in the belly and I need my ducks. It may be enough to send out that message that says, I'm feeling down and broken and I can't see the world through the spout right now. Just remind me that you're there. Maybe we need something more than that, but we have to ask. Make those fires and send out those smoke signals and ask. And then we have to love each other enough to answer. We can bring ourselves to presence and mindfulness in the world and remember how much we love it. Spend a moment looking at the way the ice coats the branches. Listen to a piece of music that swells and quiets in just the right ways to match our mood. Walk out in the silent snow. We have to find ways to remember that the world is still with us, still out there in its glory and beauty, awaiting our work to keep it whole and to make it better. And then we have to embrace the reality of our living. So much sorrow exists between our expectation of constant joy and the truth of human experience. When we remember that life comes in measures, that all things pass, that beneath the frozen is moving water, and all things will thaw. When we remember, too, how brief our time can be, we can remind ourselves that to live life fully is to love it in its fullness, loving even the hard parts. So love on, friends. Don't deny the sorrows and the losses and the griefs. Let yourself feel them and then love on in spite of them. Love on because of them. Bring those pains into your understanding of yourself and your story. Share them with your trusted paddling of ducks, and then keep right on living and loving forward. We can do it. I know we can.